Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Gerard, Witch of Earth's Curious Goods, and today I thought I would go over how to do an offering. What does it mean? Okay, so if that sounds interesting to you, keep on watching, and without further ado, let's begin. All right, so let's tackle the word offering, right? It's something to give. It's a giving. Okay, and sometimes you'll come across the word sacrifice and offering kind of interchangeable. In my opinion, they are interchangeable or kind of the same thing. Sacrifice is more of like a sacred offering, but at the end, it's something that's giving. Okay, so I want to tackle that off the bat on just the word offering and what does it mean. Okay, the next thing I want to tackle is during the time period of offering. Offerings are still done to this very day and has been done for over a millennia. Every walk of life, different walks of life, different religions, spiritual practices, you will see offerings being done. Now, does this mean that you have to do an offering? Absolutely not. It is all depending on your practice and what works for you, right? As always, what I always tell you, make the magic your own, okay? I'm just gonna go over just some of the meanings behind it in case you do want to do an offering, or maybe you do want to add it to your spiritual practice. It doesn't hurt, right? So I also want to go over offerings back then does not mean that those are the offerings you should be doing now, okay? We are humans. We are not infallible. We aren't perfect. So just because it was done back then doesn't mean that it should be done now, okay? So back then, there were human sacrifices. There were, animal sacrifices. For instance, I live in an apartment, and to be able to just go around and, just cutting up of a pig or a chicken in my apartment probably isn't a good thing, and could be breaking some laws there. So do keep that in mind. Just because it was done back then doesn't mean you should be doing it now. Okay, so I just want to premise that. Now, you do want to take into context of the culture, your spiritual practice, the indigenous people at that time. You may want to add some of that detail to your offering. So for instance, maybe you're working with Dionysus, the god of wine, right? It's favorable that he likes wine. Throughout literature, through information, that wine is associated with Dionysus, so you might want to do that as an offering. Now, you always want to do it intuitively. Maybe as you're working with Dionysus, for instance, that doesn't resonate with you, or maybe that's not what Dionysus is wanting from you. Make the magic your own, go with that. It's just to give you some context of, back then what they did. Maybe it's something you can add to your practice now. So that could be an offering, maybe just a simple cup of wine or a fine wine. It doesn't need to be expensive, right? It doesn't need to be the most expensive wine that you can come across. It can also be something as simple as just a shelf wine that you're getting from the grocery store. It's all in the meaning. It's the intention behind it. It's the offering. It's like, for instance, and I'll give you an example. When I was growing up, when we would have guests, my mom would set out a full spread. She would just start cooking and cleaning the house and rearranging a lot of things to make it very hospitable for our guests, because she was hosting a get-together, or maybe my uncle was coming into town, or my aunt's coming in town, or my grandmother was coming into town. She wanted to make sure that she was very hospitable, so she would offer food, offer something to drink, offer a place to stay. You want to build that relationship. That's the whole meaning behind an offering, in my opinion, is to commune with who you're working with. So for instance, in my practice, I worship and I'm a devotee of the Christian God. Now, I want to give thanks. On my altar, I have offerings of grain and flour and wine. And, and these are all things that I'm called to offer to God, to be able to put that on my altar as an offering because I want to give thanks. I want to show my gratitude. Now, it all depends on your spiritual practice. It could also, an offering could represent gaining favor for that spirit that you're working with. You work with your ancestors, you're communing with them, you're giving thanks, you want to share something with them, you know? Maybe it's a guardian spirit. You want them to be able to protect you and still guard you. So you want to go ahead and continue offering something to them, something to eat, something to drink. And you got to take into context that if it's somebody that's protecting you, you want to keep that in mind, that you're offering them, you're being hospitable to them, you're giving them thanks for protecting you, for offering you spiritual protection against unknown forces, or to keep you safe, or whatever your practice is. But without me going on a tangent there, keep in mind offerings can mean different things depending on your practice. It's a very broad topic, and it can mean many things since it's been done many times. Now, that comes to the question of what you should offer. As you heard me say, I offer flowers and fresh water and oats and the actual ground up flour. These are meanings that help me give gratitude to God for who I am worshiping and who I am a devotee to, okay? You have to take into context of who you're working with, okay? It could be, like I was giving an example, Dionysus for wine. And it's just something that just comes at the top of my head, okay? So it all depends on what maybe you're a Norse pagan. I'm not sure what practice you're doing. That's a very interesting thing. So if you are doing offerings, I'm curious to see, please comment down below. I would love to see what kind of offerings do you do? But continuing on, so I'm not going off a subject, what do you offer? Okay, so you will come across some texts as you're doing your own research, and I highly recommend to do your own research, okay? I'm just giving you some examples based upon my experience, my walk of life, and of course from my point of view on my spiritual practice, giving you some examples that maybe you might want to try. But do your own research and do it very well, okay? So if you're working with Odin, for instance, you might want to research what in the past Odin, what was given to him. What do you think would be acceptable? And then use your intuition, use what's calling to you for that offering, okay? Use that intuition. See what is making you give certain things, okay? And make sure that it is in tune with yourself, okay? Because, of course, we are human. We may go... if you guys hear like a little wisping noise, my AC kicked on. I apologize for that. But keep in mind that, maybe you're a single mom juggling 5 kids. Maybe you have a newborn, or maybe you're working 3 jobs, or you have depression or anxiety. You have a life to live, right? So keep in mind that it can be something simple as well. It's just as simple as time, okay? Incense. Maybe a wax warmer, you're putting each little wax tart inside of your wax warmer, and you're dedicating it to your goddess, your god, your spirit guide, your ancestors, right? I know some people that work with ancestors, they take into context of, whatever I usually eat, they might like as well. Or maybe it's Uncle Jim on the other side, and Uncle Jim liked, baked beans and a cigar. You might want to do that as your offering, right? Because that's who you're working with. You're working with your ancestors, and Uncle Jim liked baked beans and cigars. I'm not sure if those go hand in hand, but you get my drift. But those are some things that you might want to put on your altar. Now, also, I want to tackle on, where do you put these offerings? Do they have to be on an altar? The answer is no, they don't have to be on an altar, okay? Some witches, some spiritualists will leave their offerings outside. Maybe there's a certain tree, maybe there's a certain place. I personally will leave my offerings on the altar because that's my sacred space. That's where I go to worship and devote myself, okay? It's very sacred to me. Find what works for you. But keep in mind and keep in context, I want on a side note that you also want to take into account your environmental impact, right? If you are getting some bread and that you're offering and you put it in a plastic bag and you just throw it out into the forest, like, come on, now you're littering. You also have to think about how is that plastic bag going to break down. So do keep in mind for the wildlife and your environmental impact. That's like me offering you something to eat, okay? You eat all your food and then I take that plate and I just throw it in my neighbor's yard, okay? I was very hospitable to you, but then now I didn't take into account my neighbor. I was unhospitable to my neighbor. I didn't take that into account. And of course, I'm a firm believer in energy of give and take, right? You are now destroying something. You are now disrupting your neighbor's, space, their environment. And you have to also think about there are little creatures and wildlife and bacteria in the soil and the plants that are growing. You want to stay in balance with how you're influencing your outer world as well, okay? So keep that in mind as you're doing your practice, as you're doing your offerings, that, just throwing something on the side of the road that is, trash, and that can be also considered littering in a lot of places in a lot of states and countries. So keep that in mind as well, okay? So you also want to do good when it comes to your offerings and your environment, the wildlife, the plants, so forth. You've done your offerings, you've figured out where you want to do your offerings, what type of offerings, because you've done your research or you've already followed your intuition or what's called to you. Like I said, it could be as simple as time giving. I know some witches that for their offerings, for the spirit that they're working with, they volunteer. Once a month, they volunteer their time. Time is also very precious, okay? So keep that in mind. You've got what type of offerings, where to also give your offerings, and now how, Gerard, how long do you keep those offerings on there? You can use your common sense, right? If you are, offering a fruit, okay? You might not want to let that fruit decay too long where it's just gross and now it's on your altar, for instance. When I'm offering like a piece of bread, I'm not letting it getting so moldy that now there's flies and roaches and all kinds of wildlife within my home, okay? Keep that in mind. You also want to keep your altar clean. In my opinion, a clean altar demonstrates who I am as a witch, okay? As, showing my devotion, I like to keep it clean and, put together. And that, in my opinion, it's a good message to who you're working with, okay? To the God that you're working with, to the goddess, to the spirits, to the ancestors, you want to keep that in mind. So, of course, the question is how long do you leave it on the altar? You leave it until it's no longer good. For me, I like to replace the water on my altar daily, okay? That may not be very feasible to you. Maybe you're very busy, but just keep that in mind, okay? Would you drink that stale water? Would you drink that gross wine that's been sitting there for days, okay? Now, it is debatable. There are some practices where the decaying of food, the decaying of matter is releasing energy, and that's what your ancestors, your spirit guides, your God, your goddess is partaking of, that energy release of something that is breaking down because energy is being released into the atmosphere, into the air, and that's what they're partaking of. So you could go that route, but I would recommend after a while, definitely dispose of it, of course, because you might get roaches, you might get ants, you might get rats, mice, wildlife, life breeds life. Keep that into account. We do live in a modern age, okay? We're not outside running wild. So what do I do with my offerings on my altar? So I compost, okay? So I'm using flour and oats and water. I have a compost bin and I put all that in the compost bin, giving thanks after it's been on my altar for a while or a few days. The water is daily, so of course I'm refreshing that. That doesn't always go into the compost. Sometimes I just throw it down the drain, giving thanks. It's all about that intention, that time, that devotion, okay? That offering, the offering of time, the offering of gratitude. You're offering something. It's all about your practice, your spiritual path, okay? I can't tell you how to walk down your path, but I can do some recommendations, some ideas, some inspiration, and that's what this video is for. It's not to tell you exactly how to do your offerings or tell you how to do your spiritual practice, because we're two different people, two different views, two different universes, okay? We're, you know, a different practice. I'm a, you know, maybe you're a witch that doesn't even practice magic, and maybe you just don't feel like doing offerings. That's okay too, right? Make the magic your own. But should you do want to do offerings, I hope this video helped. Well, I hope you liked today's video. And if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, of course. And that way, this video can be shown to others and maybe help them with their practice, their spiritual path. As always, love yourself and others, stay earthy, and stay magical. Bye. Till next time.